Friends, would you pray with me? O Holy One, ever present, take our minds and think with them. Take our lips and speak with them. Take our hands and work with them. And take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you, love for all of creation, every created thing which you call very good. Amen. My brother was in a terrible predicament. He was 6 years old. I was 2. And according to my grandmother, there was only one place for those peas that were on his plate to land. In his belly. Certainly not in the trash, not in the garbage disposal, and definitely not even in the compost heap. But Brother Dave, like many 6-year-olds perhaps, did not love the taste of said peas. I want to give this sermon a little suspense, so I'm going to leave Dave and his peas to one side. But I want to return to my beloved grandmother. The memories that I have of my mom's mom, one specific I want to lift up is I was running down my carpeted stairs. I must have been in early high school, late junior high, with a science project in my hands, and my grandmother, who was visiting or perhaps taking care of us while my parents were gone, witnessed me almost fall on the floor and destroy my science project in my very hands. And there she declared boldly and surely, "Haste makes waste." I can still hear that reverberate in me whenever I try to do things a little too fast and a little too non-deliberately. My grandmother, as I've shared many times before, stands before me as a pillar of faith, a pillar of what it means to live closer to the earth. She grew up in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, living off the land, her ancestors farming, fishing, growing what they needed, and really no excess to speak of. She came, I've mentioned many times, because it's relevant for our landscape here in our nation, as what I consider an undocumented worker across the border in the early part of her life when she was about 18 or 19, here into Boston to clean homes and send money home to Cape Breton, an impoverished part of our world at that time. She stands to me as a pillar of faith. She who embodied haste, not waste. Many people of that generation did not waste anything. They didn't have enough to waste. They were frugal, and they brought that into their faith lives as well as their food lives. Haste makes waste, was also closely followed by another slogan that was favored of my grandmother and others: waste, not want. Now, I misunderstood this from the get-go. I didn't know that want was, at that time in the English verbiage, known to be the same as need. As it emerged in the King James Version, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." From early childhood, I always thought that means we should not want or like this shepherd named our Lord. I shall not want this person, I shall not like, I shall not desire. But of course, it means, until I encountered it through Henry Nouwen's translation, Psalm 23rd, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." I understand this translation to be about need. Waste not, want not is, of course, a moral and ethical principle of sustainability. If we don't waste it, then people will not need and live in need. Of course, there's a connection between our excess and the needs of the wider world. One, of course, that meshes well in with our theme of this weekend, our Food Waste Weekend. We're leaning into this nationwide initiative where they're asking churches, all faith communities, as an interfaith initiative, spearheaded 3 years ago by Ample Harvest, to think together about how we can change our course as a nation, as a country, and really as a globe. Here in the United States, there are some 42 million homes and community gardeners who have excess things that they grow. And this group is trying to connect them to the 8,400 nearby food pantries, 70% of which are housed in faith communities. That's incredible. Food pantries, 70% of them, including Church of the Covenant, the Food Cupboard, headed by Faith Perry and many volunteers here, that provide real sustenance through the lens of faith to others. This organization is trying to make those connections and trying to combat hunger. We cannot talk about food waste without, of course, thinking about global hunger. Some 80 million people who suffer every day from hunger. 1 person out of 21,000 people, in fact, die daily because of hunger. These statistics are way beyond usually our grasp, but it's important for us to even remember the local statistics here in our own Commonwealth. 1 in 11 people are food insecure. Here in our country, 1 in 8, 41 million Americans. So this shameful and troubling contrast, this reality is contrasted with the 30 to 50% of all food that is produced on our planet that is wasted. 1 to 2 billion tons a year is lost before it is consumed. And here in our country, that translates to about 40 to 50% of all the food that's grown is wasted. It's due to a number of factors: lack of refrigeration and infrastructure that gets the food from growers to the plate, the economics behind that. I remember some dairy farmers telling me sometimes it's more economical for them to pour that milk into the ground than it is to put it into markets at times. And of course, it relates to us. 1,000 pounds of food is wasted on average in every American household right now. These statistics are troubling, and yet if we think about our own homes, I'm guessing I know how difficult it is to live a life where there is no food put into my compost. It's hard to do at times, especially when you have food farm shares and other things where you get too much kale or too many onions, and it's sometimes harder to think about who I'm going to give that to before it wilts in your fridge. Friends, we know the challenges of waste and overabundance. And of course, we know its connections to the environment. If food waste were a country, it would be the 3rd largest country and emitter of greenhouse gases behind the US and China, right? Because of all the infrastructure that it takes to grow food and then when it's wasted. It is a matter of climate justice, of course. But if we practice lifestyles that reduce or avoid waste, if our businesses and government structures lean into that same practice, then there will be less want. Waste not, want not. Jesus makes this point throughout the Gospel of Luke. Greed leads to more need. Greed leads to the few having more than their fair share, more than they need, and therefore greed leads to waste. In today's reading from Luke chapter 12, read so well by Wendy this morning, we hear, "Take care, be on guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Do you hear the ring to last week's discussion around the reflection of the word about possessions? You cannot be my disciple if you are locked into this way of abundance and of possessions. Again, Jesus reiterates that here today. He speaks these incredibly salient words to us this morning in direct response to someone who comes up to him in the midst of a large crowd, whining about stuff. "Teacher, tell my sibling to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus swiftly rebuffs this request, saying, "Friend, who set me as a judge for you? Be on guard against all forms of greed. Life is not about stuff. It's not about money. It's certainly not about inheritance, the work that you did not even work for but received free." This response, of course, could be enough. It could be enough for all of us. Living in the United States, where 10% of households also rent extra storage to put their stuff, many people, we would have enough challenge with such words this morning. But Jesus goes on. This was his preamble to the main point. Jesus goes on to talk about this parable of the rich fool who tears down perfectly good barns to simply build bigger ones to store excess goods that he does not need. And in so doing, prioritizes a self-focused life of eating, drinking, and being merry. But the voice of God shows up like a Dickens Ghost of Christmas Futures and calls out his folly, saying, "You cannot take it with you when you die." We remember words earlier in Luke, "What does it profit someone to gain the whole world, but to lose or forfeit themselves?" So Jesus reminds us that the essence of life is far richer than a life of riches. If we push back a little bit on this parable, what is wrong, especially perhaps thinking about our own economy, about providing for a rainy day, about barn raising, if you will, to provide for the times of drought, the times of inadequacy, the times of hurricanes, the times of despair. Didn't Joseph do this for Pharaoh in Egypt? He planned to save for 7 years when there was plenty so that they could provide for themselves during those 7 years of famine. And notice the powerful point. I think this is intentional here with Jesus. He knew that people would have that example in their minds when he raises this parable of the rich fool. The pronouns used here, again and again, are first pronouns. I, The rich fool is saying, what should I do? I have no place to store my crops. I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build longer ones, bigger ones, and I will store my grain. I will say even to my soul, hey soul, let's have a conversation. You have many ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Herein lies the problem. Joseph provided for the good of the commons. The fool is providing only for his own needs. And notice too what's missing from the lips of this foolish landowner in the story. Love of God. There is no gratitude for the very gifts of the earth that come to him, independent of his own labor. He's not a farmer, he is a landowner. He is not even grateful to God for this. Throughout the scriptures, especially the Hebrew ones, you hear over and over again, relationship to the land is worship, because there should be always the gratitude to God for all that comes, the first fruits given over first and foremost to God as they understood it through the work of the temple at that time. The Greek word used here for greed can be translated as a grasping with no regard for others. Such grasping, of course, gets in the way of moral living. I won't even begin to lean into the landscape that is our political and power structures of our country right now. There are so many examples of greed which skews the good of the commons and the love to which we are all called. But friends, of course, this parable is not just directed at those who have billions and billions. It's directed to each and every one of us. For if greed gets in the way of love, it can be understood as idolatry, something that gets in the way of God. And it's therefore a material and a spiritual problem. For those of us who have the privilege to have resources beyond the living of our day-to-day basic needs, it's critically important for us to look at how we earn, how we save, and how we spend our money. This is not a new concept for us here at Church of the Covenant. For years and years, this community has leaned in to the complexity and the opportunities of resources for those who have access. And I continue to encourage us to do that, led by our generosity generators again this fall as the season of stewardship and generosity unfolds. Let's not just think about how we can sustain how we do things here at Church of the Covenant, but how can we transform our own giving patterns to be more radically aligned to the ways of God in our world, giving of ourselves as well as our money, our gifts, and our passions. And so this question of does this thing, will this spending, will this saving of money help me love God and neighbor more fully or less? It would be a rubric that we use as we move ahead as people of faith. Remember, this selfish fool parable lands square in the middle of Luke's gospel. If you were to flip it open, right in the middle, chapter 12 lands squarely in the middle of a long discourse of Luke and these communities asking the question of what does it mean to have a spiritual life in the light of God's free and forward love toward us. Taking a look at what we keep in our barns, or asking ourselves if we even need barns at all, taking a look at what we most value deeply in life is a central question for our spiritual lives. And sometimes things it may be calling us to give up things if we desire to grow. Lutheran Bishop Patricia Lull makes this clear as she writes, a capacity to trust in God can deepen only as other matters lessen their grip on our lives. What are gripping each of our lives these days? Busy schedules, hopes, fears, challenges, health concerns, the connections to loved ones, the call toward justice here in our city, in our world. And as we ask those questions, what barns might need to be reduced or not even built? What idols might need to be toppled as we try to live into those questions, as we refocus our gaze on the devotion of the very author and creator and sustainer of all life? These are vital questions that I am grateful that we as a church are not afraid of. And we have a lot of opportunities before us this fall as we unfold together our life. As we gather, there are 2 retreats before us. There are many book discussions before us. Rachel Held Evans is about to be unfolded in our Bible study, starting maybe next week as the books arrive. There are times for us to gather. There are gatherings through our social justice experiences. There are Christian education opportunities after church. There are times to get together around suppers. We are reinitiating the Suppers for 8, where people get together to eat together who may not know each other very well. And I encourage us during those times to ask those hard questions about resources, about what we have and what we don't have, and what might our church have. How do we look at our congregation, how it's embodied here on 67 Newbury Street through the historical sanctuary in which we most often connect with, through our endowment, which sustains that? What ways can we think about leaning into those things and asking the hard questions about what does God call us to do and to use here and now to be about the gospel in the fullest ways that we can, and not to build barns that produce waste. Being rich toward God is what Jesus calls us to do here. Being rich toward God and remembering that we are called, yes, to eat, drink, and be merry, as Isaiah says, for tomorrow we will die. Jesus calls us to the remembrance of mortality, the remembrance of finiteness, and the remembrance to live fully here and now and live fully for others. As we remembered our dear sibling in faith, Elsa Adelaide, last week, we were reminded of all that she gave, the way that she provided a voice for often the voiceless in our society through her work as a speech therapist, the way that she leaned in to the messages of our earth by collecting seashells and rocks and spreading that love to others, reminding others to pay attention, to slow down, remember that haste makes waste. So we remember, too, what is most valuable in life when we face death. How to be rich toward God, how to recognize God as the very source of all bounty. How do we be rich toward the one who has provided everything for us? It's a tension we feel every time we return the offering plates at church. Listen to our prayer of dedication. Listen to that prayer. Remember that it's God who gives us everything, and our giving is simply a symbolic way to realign our hearts and recognize that more fully. God does not smile more fully because there's a few more dollars in an offering plate. God smiles. The smile of God, the intention of God is more pleased when we together recognize our connectedness to this one that we hear about once again in Genesis. As we hear about the very beginnings, this reading today comes from the end of the 6th day. And we hear about all the plants and the vegetables and the fruit that were created for human and animal consumption. Remembering that Adam and Eve and the representative creatures at the beginning were all vegans. It wasn't until after the flood in which meat was first consumed. But this idea that there is relationship and balance from the very beginning, God orders that as our story that we lift up. And so being rich toward God is, I think, recognizing that relationality and that balance that God desires. Being rich toward God is prioritizing relationships in our lives. I wonder if the brother who first comes to Jesus here recognizes that at the end of this parable. That really what's most important is his relationship here with his sibling, not the inheritance that they can squabble over. How often do siblings lose connection over the burdens of inheritance in our own world? So friends, how we frame things, how we see things really deeply matters. And I encourage us today as a community, as we gather after church and think about how we're called to follow after this ever-changing Spirit who calls us never-changing Spirit who calls us into the ways that are always changing, that we follow after that in the ways of abundance and not through the lens of deficit, not through the lens of lacking, but through the lens of not wanting, of not needing. Today we think about food waste. We also think about food justice. We're so grateful that Mara is here. She will be a young adult volunteer among us, and we will get to commission her as she joins us and blesses our community and worship throughout this coming year. She reminds us of the abundance of God and the grace of God for bringing young people into our midst to inspire us to lean into these questions. So too, Adam Isvitsky, our new associate minister here, reminds us of the abundance of God and new people that God is bringing into our midst. So I encourage us as a community, as we think about these things, and we think about food waste, how might we lean into food justice? There are incredible things happening here in our Commonwealth, and I'm grateful that we live here in Massachusetts, a place where there's a law, it's only one of 4 states that has a commercial food waste disposal ban. But here in Greater Boston, both nonprofit and for-profit companies are coming up with solutions to address the food waste crisis. I want to think about a few here just to name: the Daily Table, the grocery store in Dorchester, that turns excess food from restaurants and big-name grocers into dignified, healthy shopping experiences for its low-income clients. There's food for free in Cambridge on the other side of the river, where a former YAV, Stuart Maps, served 2 years ago, that is rescuing wasted food and turning it into healthy meals for school children, seniors, community college students. And thirdly, there's the Boston area Gleaners, headquartered in Waltham, who take volunteers out to local farms each day to respond to that biblical call of harvesting extra produce to feed the poor. There's Food for All, a Boston-based tech company that's launched an app to connect restaurants to consumers to reduce excess waste. There's Spoiler Alert, which helps groups like Lynn's Lunch Place know about excess food here in our city. Friends, there's a lot of creative solutions happening. If we leave ourselves only in the lens of statistics that can overwhelm, we might miss the glimpses of what creative people are doing to respond to the challenges around us. So I want to end with that cliffhanger of the challenge laid before my dear brother at that dinner table. As he saw this pile of peas that he detested, he quickly realized that his brother was still pretty verbal, me. So while my grandmother and my mother were perhaps in the kitchen, he took those peas and put them under my chair, under my high chair, therefore implying that it was me who brought them. And when the grandmother and mother came back, his plate was miraculously clean too. Now, I'm not advocating here deception or deceiving our paternal and maternal and saints who've gone before us and those with us who've guided us and given to us and provided for us, those quotes about haste not waste. But I am advocating here for that creativity that my brother displayed in responding to challenges. Friends, we are called to think outside of the box when we're faced with challenges. The challenges of food waste, the challenges of limited budgets, the challenges of the call toward peace and justice, the challenge of being Jesus in our world. But I'd encourage us to look harder, past the obvious, past the statistics, and look for these places like Spoiler Alert and other people, these spaces and these stories that can inspire us to look past numbers and look toward the abundance to which God is calling us. Because we cannot own the sunlit sky, the moon, the wildflowers growing, for we are all part of that which is within life's river flowing. With open hands, receive and share the gifts of God's creation, that all may have abundant life in every earthly nation. Friends, that will be our next refrain as we sing the next hymn, with open hands and open hearts for the abundance that God is calling us to. May we do so. May we be creative and surprised in our response.